Hello and welcome to episode 4 of TL Blue, your fortnightly cybersecurity podcast focused on important cybersecurity news for Australian organisations. My name is Brad Morgan. I'm the Triskel Labs Security Operations Centre Manager. As always, today I'm joined by Richard Granger, the Triskel Labs Global DFIR Lead. Rich, what's on the agenda for today?
As usual, we've got a few topics to run through today, Brad. We'll be starting off by talking about an extensive global cybercrime operations takedown with some Australians in the mix for that. We'll be talking about MITRE's network breach via the Ivanti 0 days, which we did cover a couple of weeks ago.
I remember CISA were done as well, so this will be...
Yep, an interesting topic. For our vulnerability of the fortnight, we'll be going through the new Palo Alto vulnerability, which is very, very topical.
Is that something they asked Ivanti to hold their beer?
Yes, they wanted to, take the limelight off Ivanti for a little bit. And we'll be wrapping up with talking about the SOC and DFIR operational highlights.
Awesome. Excellent. All right. This is something I've been wanting to talk about for a while. And those of you that have seen or will see the Cybears episode that was released on Wednesday, the 24th of April, you'll see us talking about this sort of thing in that particular Cybears episode. So this is a global cybercrime sting. Richard, can you walk us through this one a little bit, please?
Yeah. So what's essentially happened is there was a platform called LabHost, which also went by the name LabRat, which was essentially a phishing as a service platform. So like a lot of other platforms, you can pay your monthly subscription to get access to the platform. And essentially, you could use that to develop and manage phishing infrastructure to try and get lots of credentials.
Yeah, and I mean, and you say, pay your monthly subscription. This thing wasn't expensive. For what you're getting out of it, it was not expensive. And from my understanding, it's in line with what others are costing out there as well.
Yeah.
So, the standard subscription was US $179 a month. And that focused offered dozens of pages targeting Canadian institutions predominantly. It then moved to a premium account for US $249 a month. So it had all the standard tier functionality and then offered premium subscription to US institutions as well before moving up to a worldwide membership, which was $300 a month, which even in US dollars is pretty cheap.
Absolutely bargain.
And that offered 70 phishing pages targeting international organizations and added 10 additional hosted pages. And that's targeting organizations here in Australia, Hong Kong, Ireland, Italy, the UK, US, Canada, UAE. It was hitting pretty broadly. But coming out of that, I'd like to know how that impacted some people here in Australia.
Yeah, so obviously we do get targeted here in Australia quite heavily with these kinds of things. But yeah, it seems to be a bit of a joint takedown through various law enforcement agencies across the world. In particular down here, so the AFP actually released a media release on the 18th to talking about what they did here, and they responsible for arresting 5 individuals here in Australia, and apparently there was 32 other individuals linked to this arrested overseas as well. Yeah,
so 2 of those, Melbourne man and Adelaide man, were charged with they're believed to be LabHost users, and they were arrested during the warrants and charged with cyber-related offences. The other 3 were arrested with drug offences, so not actually related back to the cybercrime side of things. But that's only 2 users out of what they're reporting globally was quite a large user base. I remember reading somewhere that it was in the thousands. So yeah. I think there's going to be more coming out of this one. especially seeing there's been some other activity recently in the UK as well. So one of the really interesting things about the functionality in this one is the ability to proxy MFA to be able to get around two-factor authentication. Can you just give us, for those that aren't aware, give us a walkthrough of what that looks like?
Yeah. So it's basically what was commonly known as adversary in the middle, and essentially, in particular, when we talk about things like M365. When you're authenticating to the platform, you'll be getting a valid session token, and that can include MFA as well. And essentially, by using this adversary in the middle techniques, the threat actor is able to get a hold of that session token, and that can then just be essentially copy and pasted into a browser to relay it and authenticate as that user that had their session token. So a very easy way for a threat actor to get access to the underlying infrastructure.
Easy and frightening.
Yep.
I think about my mum, and there is no way that she would know if she'd fallen victim to something like this.
Yeah.
I think about the people I walk past on the street every day, and it scares me. There's really no way that they would know if they were falling victim to this sort of thing. So,
yeah,
yeah, it's a scary one to see. And, part of the AFP release is they're saying that there were nearly 94,000 victims in Australia based off of this one platform that they've pulled down. So it's pretty extensive. However, there's a lot more platforms out there. And as we've seen in the ransomware market, if one gets interrupted, they tend to scatter and go elsewhere. So
another one will pop up.
Yeah, I applaud this work, and I think I'm looking forward to seeing more and more reports of this kind of interruption occurring to other platforms out there. But it also does then come back to the importance of defense in depth, knowing that MFA bypass is, I'd hate to say it, but it's almost an off-the-shelf capability these days.
Yeah, it's something we see all the time now. It's just so common that you can't just assume that MFA is, the silver bullet that we thought it was. You need to make sure that there is defense in depth there.
Yep. Yeah, it's a frightening one. So, all right, look, unless you've got anything more to say on that one, I think we might jump on to our next topic, if that's all right with you.
Yep, no problems.
When I saw the Palo vulnerability being a perfect 10 out of 10, I thought, excellent, we're not going to talk about Ivanti this fortnight. And then MITRE came out and said that they've had a similar issue to what CISA had. Can you just give us a little bit of a rundown on that one, please?
Yeah, so essentially MITRE, for those not familiar with them, they do a lot of really great work and sort of in the security field. One of the things that most people know them for is MITRE ATT&CK, obviously the sort of categorization framework for threat actor activity. I know we use it in DFIR. I know it's basically used by pretty much everyone that works in cybersecurity. So definitely a well-known name, MITRE. But essentially what's happened is in January of this year, they identified that they had some suspicious activity within their network, and essentially that led to them to discover the breach. And basically analysis of that identified that it wasn't their core enterprise network that was impacted. It was, I believe, like a sort of a testing network that was impacted, but essentially threat actors were able to use Ivanti vulnerabilities to gain access to it. So very similar to what we've sort of discussed over the last few weeks with Ivanti.
Yeah, and look, from my side of things, it's a massive reminder that CISA was done, and now MITRE's been done. These are people at the forefront of cybersecurity, and they're
Yep.
still able to be impacted. So it is a big reminder that no one's immune to these kinds of attacks. If you've got a dedicated threat actor, although Ivanti isn't saying it was a dedicated threat actor by any means, but you can still fall victim. You need to make sure that you are reevaluating and continually evaluating your security frameworks and your preparedness, and make sure you've got all of those sorts of things in place. MITRE handled this quite well. They picked it up early, and they were able to limit the effect from what I've been able to tell by reading into this. It is critical to have those detections in place. And again, broken record time, defense in depth. Making sure that if they can get in through the front door, you've got some other controls there to stop them moving around as well.
Yeah, I think they've done a pretty good job of this as well, sort of with their, I guess, openness around how they've sort of acknowledged the breach and talked about it. I think communication and stuff like this is critical. And sort of letting people, like, it's always going to be a juggling act between, letting people know early versus when not a lot of information might be available, particularly if there's actual, data that's breached and impacted by it. But I think, keeping people up to date, being very open and forward about what's happened is pretty important, especially with big names like this.
Exactly. And look, I mean, one of MITRE's guiding principles is securing the internet and trying to be open about what they're doing. That's why they release so many good tools out there. MITRE Attack's just one of those tools that they release. I leverage a few others through what I do. They're absolutely brilliant people to use, to follow and use their tools. And it's just really, really refreshing to see what is effectively a case study in doing this response really, really well. Let's move on to Palo's hold my beer moment.
Yes.
So our vulnerability of the fortnight is the Palo Alto firewalls CVE 2024-3400. That's a nice, easy one to remember as well.
It is. It's a nice number.
So I know this is in Global Protect, but can you give us a little bit of a summary of this one, please, mate?
Yep. So essentially, Global Protect is the VPN functionality within the Palo Alto network firewalls, and essentially what has happened here is there is a command injection vulnerability within the operating system, which essentially will allow a threat actor to execute arbitrary code with root privileges. So, remote code execution as the highest level privilege on the firewall, which is obviously not an ideal thing that you want to happen.
No, it's definitely not. Now, the vulnerable versions here, I've read a couple of things. Initially, they said it was version 10 and above. However, in follow-up advisories, it's been revealed that versions 8.1 before 8.1.17, version 9, certain versions, version 9.1 and version 10 were all affected.
Yep.
So they've come out and recommended that people apply the patches and all that sort of thing as expected. One of the things I want to look at here was when this was first announced, they did recommend a workaround, which was disabling the device telemetry. Was listed as a workaround. They've since come and said that that is no longer an effective mitigation. So device telemetry does not need to be enabled for the Pan OS firewall to be exposed to attacks related to this vulnerability. So can you just, I guess, give our listeners a little bit of a brief on what impact that could have if they've taken that step but haven't gone and actually updated to one of the non-affected versions?
Yeah, I think what's probably happened here is essentially like these kind of things are always evolving, especially during the timing, like when it's first identified. And that's probably why, more versions have been listed as, more is understood about this. But essentially, I think the takeaway for this is when you do identify that there's a critical vulnerability like this on something that you're running within your network, it's very important to continually get new information on it and not just rely on one thing that's been recommended early on by the vendor, because that information will often change. We've seen it before with other sort of platforms where there might be one vulnerability that's identified and that's patched, but then everyone's sort of focused on it for obvious reasons, and that leads to further vulnerabilities being identified and further patches need to be applied or further workarounds that need to be applied. And it's very important to stay on top of it and be sort of agile. I know a lot of organizations that will be running this sort of infrastructure, a very valid workaround for this would have been turn it off, unplug it until everything can be mitigated. But obviously, if you're an organization that relies on this for your users to access the environment and actually do work, that's not necessarily something you're going to be able to just do. You've got a lot to sort of weigh up there.
Exactly. And, these devices and this infrastructure is absolutely critical to a lot of businesses. So, yeah, look, and I completely understand what you're saying there is, yes, take the initial announcement and take those actions and then keep checking back in. I was actually unaware that mitigation was no longer recommended until I read through the release again today, because I hadn't looked into this for a week. Now, I don't have one of these, so I don't need to patch it, right? But I would hope that this isn't used to anyone out there, that mitigation that they put in place is no longer effective. If it is, I apologise. But chances are you're going to have to be running a script to go and have a look for any signs of exploitation, and you might be jumping on the call to a DFIR team to start having a look for some other things, depending on what that comes back with. So on that, Palo have published a script to be able to go or some checks to be able to go and have a look and see if there's been any evidence of attempted exploit activity. We'll include those in the show notes and with this release. I do recommend this. And again, still keep checking the Palo website because that script could change as well. The IOCs can change and all that sort of thing. Richard, from all of your years of experience in DFIR, if anyone does have any signs of exploitation or they're seeing anything or they're even remotely concerned about this, what should the next steps be?
Yeah, it's really important that if you are delayed in mitigating, in patching, it's not uncommon for organizations to say, we need to patch this, and then it gets scheduled in for a week after, because you've got to go through change requests and all that process. So if there is that gap or you think for whatever reason it might have been compromised, it's really important to basically enact your incident response. So that could be, contacting your cyber insurance. If you've got a DFIR company that you work with, talk to them about what steps can be taken. But it is very important to basically get that assurance that there has not been any exploitation of it, because we do see all the time services like this are exploited by threat actors, and they might not necessarily, come and progress further in the network straight away. There might be, web shells and backdoors and things like that that are placed on the system, and then they're going to come back at a later point. So if it has been...
So in what I'm taking away there is initial access brokers are looking for this sort of thing as soon as they're released. They're out there. They're not the ones who are out there deploying the ransomware. Their whole business model is to sell that access onto the threat actors that are deploying ransomware.
Yep, and we've seen gaps of 6 months between an initial exploit in systems like this to a ransomware group coming in and encrypting systems, stealing data.
Yep. Yeah. I can think of a couple of cases where you guys have seen this, and that's just me from the outside of the DFIR side of things. So, it is one there that needs to be taken incredibly seriously. And unfortunately, it feels like every month where we are seeing these 10 out of 10 vulnerabilities in one platform or another.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. They used to be rare. They used to be not all that common. If you look at the trajectory of vulnerabilities from 2014 to 2024, the growth in vulnerabilities and the growth in serious and critical vulnerabilities is just amazing.
Scary.
It is. How to tell? I spend a lot of time with our vulnerability analysts working through things. So I want to touch on our last topic. As usual, I like to give people an insight of what we're seeing either in the SOC or in DFIR. This fortnight, we've got one where the two teams work together. I can't go we can't go too deep into this one because it is a client. But can you give us a brief rundown of what we saw and how the stars aligned for this one to occur?
Yeah. So essentially, what happened is the organization where I basically identified that a platform that they used. So this was not like a server that was hosted by them, but this is just a third party hosted platform that they used had been.
I just quickly want to throw in there, it was also not monitored by the SOC. The SOC were completely unaware of this platform.
Yep.
Sorry, I need to put that out there.
Yep. It was essentially exploited and accessed by a threat actor, which did lead to some information being accessed by them, and an investigation that was done sort of by the SOC and DFIR sort of in conjunction to each other. It was identified that essentially what happened to allow the threat actor to gain access to that third party host was a redline stealer credential dump, which we've discussed in previous CyberCrimes and things like that.
That we have.
Yep. And unfortunately, because as Brad mentioned, this is a platform that's not essentially part of their core infrastructure, and with essentially, I mean, you can say it's sort of shadow IT, and because there's no sort of monitoring around it, it was kind of not able to be detected and anything done at the time of that unauthorized access to it. Yeah,
and the other contributing factor that I believe is the device that Redline was able to access and steal the creds from was not a corporate device.
Yeah.
I don't want to go too much beyond that, but it was a legitimate person who had the credentials. They were supposed to have them. They were expected to have them as part of their job function, but it was not a corporate device and therefore did not have EDR on it. If it had been a corporate device or even enrolled and had policies enforced and had EDR on it, I doubt Redline would have been able to run and do what it did to steal those creds. So there's a few different, if I go back to an old risk management thing, a lot of holes in the Swiss cheese lined up for this one to get through. It's unfortunate, but it has resulted in a bad time for that particular client.
Yeah. It's kind of sort of, I guess, let down by the third party that was obviously hit by Redline, which is not great. And this is another great example of why credentials should not be saved in a browser. Use a password management platform. There's plenty out there that all do very similar things that would, you keep stuff in there. And if, unfortunately you do have Redline stealer being executed on a machine, it's not going to be able to steal those credentials from, being saved in Google Chrome or Edge.
Exactly. Yes. Look, it's unfortunate, but I think it's a lesson learned. It's something that I am going to be seeking permission from the client to do a lot deeper write-up on. If I do receive that permission, it is something that we'll be pushing out through our through the Triskel Labs LinkedIn and that sort of thing for people to have a better read up on. I think it highlights a number of issues, and they all just combine together to allow that to occur.
I wanted to talk about in previous episodes, but it's not really Australian, so I didn't. But
Mate, feel free. We've got a couple of minutes if you want.
Yeah, basically, it's you might have heard about the British Library being basically attacked last year, and
well, this is you were just in England, so this
I
might
was.
work.
I got back this morning. I'm still on UK time zone, so
I do appreciate you doing this this recording today.
It's an interesting time, but essentially, what the British Library have done is they obviously had an investigation going for quite a number of months, and then they released a full statement, incident review of what happened, and they go into quite a bit of detail around how the threat actor got initial access. Basically, there wasn't definitive evidence, but they think it could have been through RDP, things like that. And I think it's a really good thing to be able to do case studies like this and share that information with everyone else, so they can get a real understanding of how these attacks happen in the real world, and how you can basically protect yourself from being a victim as well.
Yeah, look, I completely agree. Seeing real world relatable incidents that are, the most basic of things have happened for this breach to occur. Seeing that and being able to take away some real actionable items from that sort of thing for organisations, I think are critically important. So again, I am looking forward to being able to do some more of these types of write-ups and walking people through these things. So looking forward to getting permission for that one. Okay, mate, that wraps up today's episode. Thanks to everyone for tuning in.
Yeah, thanks everyone for listening.
Yep, and we'll be back in 2 weeks to explore new threats and provide our insights and our thoughts on whatever else we're seeing out in the news. So make sure you follow us on LinkedIn, the Triskel Labs LinkedIn page. TL Blues released through there. There's also it's also uploaded to YouTube. So please feel free to jump on there and give us a like and a subscribe on there.
Excellent.
Thank you very much, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Thanks all.